Sarah Parker entered the Oakwood Business Center without realizing her life was about to change forever. Faced with $1 million proposal, she had to choose between saving her mother or diving into a contract filled with secrets. But what seemed like a solution soon revealed itself as a dangerous game with no way back. Sarah Parker's high heels echoed through the mirrored corridors of the Oakwood Business Center as she followed the impeccably dressed secretary. Her hands trembled slightly, and she kept them firmly crossed over the folder she carried, a set of documents that could change her life forever. "This way, Miss Parker." The secretary gestured towards a set of massive mahogany double doors, as imposing as the rest of the 40th floor. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted the blazer she had bought especially for this occasion, and entered the room. The environment was even more intimidating than she had imagined. A panoramic view of New York City stretched through the floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that certainly cost more than she earned in a year, and, sitting behind an imposing desk, Andrew Blackwood. He was exactly like in the business magazine photos, perfectly styled dark hair, defined jawline, and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to assess every detail. He wore a tailored suit that Sarah imagined cost the equivalent of several months' rent for her small apartment. "Miss Parker, please have a seat." His voice was deep and controlled, showing no emotion beyond professional courtesy. Sarah settled into the leather chair, trying to maintain an upright posture, despite the nervousness that threatened to consume her. On the table between them, a multi-page contract awaited her signature. "I imagine Dr. Thompson has already explained the main terms of our agreement," Andrew began, his fingers drumming softly on the glass table. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah replied, proud that her voice didn't tremble. "But I confess I still have some doubts." A small smile, which didn't reach. His eyes appeared on Andrew's lips. "Naturally, it's quite an unusual agreement." Unusual was an understatement. Sarah still remembered the moment she received the proposal 2 weeks ago through Dr. Thompson, a respected doctor who was taking care of her mother at the hospital. The offer was surreal. $5 million to conceive and give birth to the heir of one of the country's largest fortunes. "The contract is quite specific, Miss Parker," Andrew continued, flipping through the pages with surgical precision. "How you'll have to move to the Blackwood mansion for the entire gestation. You'll have access to the best medical care, an exclusive team at your disposal, but you must follow a rigorous protocol of absolute discretion." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the first page of the contract. The clauses were extensive and detailed, covering everything from her daily routine to the legal consequences if she broke the confidentiality agreement. "And what about the—" She hesitated, looking for the right words. "The conception?" "It will be done through in vitro fertilization," Andrew responded promptly, as if discussing any ordinary business transaction. "The best specialists have already been contacted. The process will begin as soon as you're settled in the mansion." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The coldness with which he treated the whole matter was disconcerting, but she needed to remember the reason that had brought her there. The face of her mother, connected to tubes in a hospital bed, needing an expensive experimental treatment, was all she needed to maintain her determination. "And after the birth," she asked, her voice firmer now, "you'll receive the full payment and can go on with your life normally, as long as you maintain absolute secrecy about the agreement." Andrew leaned slightly forward. "Is there anything else you'd like to know?" Sarah had thousands of questions, but one in particular wouldn't leave her mind. "Why me? There must be hundreds of women willing to do this for much less." For the first time, something like surprise passed over Andrew's face. He studied her for a moment before answering. "You possess genetic characteristics compatible with the established requirements, Miss Parker. Additionally, your discretion and current situation make you suitable for the agreement." The way he said "current situation" made Sarah feel exposed. Of course they had investigated her life, her struggle to keep her job as a substitute teacher, the growing debts with the hospital, the absence of family members besides her sick mother. "And your family?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Do they approve of this arrangement?" A muscle twitched in Andrew's jaw. "My family understands the need to ensure the continuity of Blackwood businesses. That's all you need to know about that." Sarah nodded, realizing she had touched a sensitive point. She turned her attention back to the contract, reading each word carefully. The clauses were clear. She would have to submit to a rigorous diet and exercise regime, agree to constant monitoring of her health and activities, and give up any unauthorized contact with the outside world during the gestation. As she read, she felt the weight of Andrew's gaze upon her. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his cold and professional demeanor. A shadow of concern? Regret? But before she could analyze it further, the expression had disappeared. "Time is of the essence in this agreement, Miss Parker," he said, extending an expensive-looking pen in her direction. "We need your decision now." Sarah looked at the pen, her heart beating hard against her chest. Somewhere in the city, her mother was fighting for her life in a hospital bed, dependent on expensive equipment and medications she could barely afford. $5 million would not only ensure the complete treatment, but would also give them a chance to start over, free from the debts that suffocated them. With a decisive movement, Sarah took the pen. Her hand didn't tremble when she signed, her name on the dotted line. "Welcome to the Blackwood family, Miss Parker," Andrew said, collecting the contract. "A car awaits you in the parking lot. It will take you to gather your belongings and then straight to the mansion." Sarah stood up, feeling strangely distant from herself, as if she were observing the scene from outside her body. Before she could head to the door, Andrew called her again. "Miss Parker." His voice had a different tone now, almost hesitant. "There's something you need to understand. Once you pass through the gates of Blackwood Mansion, your life will change completely. There's no turning back. Are you sure you're prepared for this?" For a moment, Sarah saw something in his eyes, a silent warning, perhaps. But she had already made her decision. "I'm prepared, Mr. Blackwood." As she headed to the elevator, Sarah couldn't imagine that those words would seal her fate in a way she could never have foreseen. The contract she had just signed was only the beginning of a much larger story, full of secrets that the Blackwood family kept under lock and key. The moment the elevator doors closed, Sarah Parker left her old life behind. What she didn't know was that in the coming months, she would discover that the real price of that agreement went far beyond the promised millions, and that some truths, once revealed, can change everything. The sun was already setting when the armored Mercedes crossed the huge iron gates of the Blackwood estate. Sarah observed, through the tinted windows, the meticulously manicured gardens extending in all directions. The main mansion appeared imposingly at the end of an avenue, lined with century-old palm trees, a majestic construction that seemed straight out of a period film. "We've arrived, Miss Parker," the driver announced, his voice neutral and professional. Sarah got out of the car holding her only suitcase. She had left most of her belongings in her apartment, following the instructions received. "Your entire wardrobe will be provided according to family standards," they had said. Before she could take 2 steps towards the main staircase, a middle-aged woman, dressed in an impeccable uniform, appeared to greet her. "Good evening, Miss Parker. I'm Margaret, the head housekeeper." She gestured for a staff member to take Sarah's suitcase. "Mrs. Blackwood awaits you in the blue salon." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew she would eventually meet Victoria Blackwood, the family matriarch, but she didn't expect it to be so soon. Margaret led her through corridors decorated with artworks that seemed to be worth fortunes. The sound of their steps was muffled by the Persian rugs that covered the marble floor. The blue salon lived up to its name, an elegant room decorated in different shades of blue, with antique furniture and Venetian mirrors on the walls. Seated in an armchair that looked more like a throne was Victoria Blackwood. Even at 70, Victoria maintained a regal posture. Her grey hair was perfectly styled, and her jewelry, a set of sapphires that matched the room's decor, sparkled under the crystal chandelier's light. "So you're the girl," Victoria said, her cold eyes studying Sarah from head to toe. It wasn't a question. "Good evening, Mrs. Blackwood," Sarah responded, trying to maintain her composure under that appraising gaze. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Sit down." Victoria indicated a chair in front of her. "Margaret, bring the tea." Sarah settled in, feeling out of place in her simple blazer in front of Victoria's timeless elegance. The silence that followed was broken only by the clinking of porcelain cups when Margaret returned with the tea service. "I imagine my son has explained your obligations," Victoria began, her voice carrying a tone that made Sarah feel even smaller. "Yes, ma'am. The contract was very clear about the expectations. Contracts, my dear, are just paper." Victoria took a sip of her tea. "What's at stake here is much bigger than some legal clauses. We're talking about the future of the Blackwood family." Sarah nodded, not knowing exactly how to respond. Victoria continued, "You'll have everything you need here, the best doctors, a dedicated team, absolute comfort. But there are rules that must be followed to the letter." She made a significant pause. "The first one is never, under any circumstances, to circulate around the mansion without accompaniment after 10 o'clock at night." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, intrigued by the strange restriction. "The second, all your communications with the outside must go through prior approval. This includes phone calls, emails, any form of contact." "But what about my mother?" Sarah asked, feeling a tightness in her chest. "Ah, yes, your mother." A cold smile appeared on Victoria's lips. "Don't worry. She's being transferred to a private clinic today. She'll have the best possible treatment, as long as you fulfill your part of the agreement." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but kept her face neutral. "And the third rule?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The third rule is the most important." Victoria leaned slightly forward. "There are places in this mansion that are strictly off-limits to you. The west wing of the second floor, for example, is closed for renovations. Under no circumstances should you try to access it. Understood?" Sarah nodded, but her mind was already registering something strange. From the car window, she had observed the entire extent of the mansion and hadn't seen any sign of ongoing renovations. "Excellent." Victoria placed her cup on the table with a precise movement. "Margaret will take you to your quarters now. Dr. Thompson will come early tomorrow morning for the first exams." As Sarah stood up, Victoria called her again. "Ah, and Miss Parker?" Her eyes had an intimidating gleam. "Remember, you're here for a single purpose. Don't get distracted by unnecessary curiosities." Margaret led Sarah through another set of corridors to a room on the first floor. The room was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft shades of beige and pink. A king-size bed dominated the space, and the French windows overlooked a private garden. "Dinner will be served at 7, Margaret informed. "You'll find a complete wardrobe in the closet. Mrs. Blackwood expects you to dress appropriately for all meals." As soon as she was alone, Sarah allowed herself to take a deep breath for the first time since she arrived. She walked to the window, observing the sky that was now rapidly darkening. The garden below was silent, except for a figure that caught her attention. A man in a dark suit who looked more like a security guard than a gardener, walking purposefully among the bushes. Turning to explore the room, Sarah noticed a folder on the desk. Inside, she found her new schedule, specific times for meals, exercises, medical appointments, and even for using the pool or walking in the gardens. As she flipped through the papers, an envelope fell to the floor. Inside was an old photo which clearly shouldn't have been there. The image showed a group of people in front of Blackwood Mansion, dated 25 years ago. What caught her attention was a man at the edge of the photo. He was impossibly familiar. Sarah felt her heart race. The man had the same eyes she saw in the mirror every day, the same face shape. There was no doubt it was her father, much younger, wearing a suit and smiling next to William Blackwood, the deceased patriarch of the family. Her hands were shaking as she turned the photo over. On the back, a single handwritten line. "Finance Team, 1998. The year her father had disappeared. A noise in the hallway made her quickly put the photo back in the envelope. Seconds later, Margaret knocked on the door. "Dinner will be served in 15 minutes, Miss Parker," she announced. "Mrs. Blackwood expects your presence." "Thank you, Margaret. I'll get changed right away." As soon as the housekeeper walked away, Sarah hid the envelope among her clothes in the suitcase. Her heart was still racing, and 1,000 questions were spinning in her mind. What was her father doing in a photo with the Blackwood family? Why had no one ever mentioned this connection? And why was that photo in her room? As she prepared for dinner, Sarah had the distinct feeling that the eyes of Blackwood Mansion were watching her. Somehow she knew she had found much more than a simple photograph. She had discovered the first piece of a puzzle that could cost her life. What she didn't know was that, at that exact moment, strategically positioned security cameras were transmitting her every move to a room on the second floor, where Victoria Blackwood watched everything with an enigmatic smile on her lips. The first week at Blackwood Mansion passed like a blur of medical consultations and adjustments to the new routine. Sarah now found herself sitting in an armchair in the library, watching the rain falling on the impeccable gardens. Dr. Thompson had just left after another battery of tests, and she could still taste the metallic flavor in her mouth from the vitamins she was required to take. "More tea, Miss Parker." Margaret appeared silently by her side, as she always did. "No, thank you, Margaret," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on a distant point in the garden where two security guards were making their usual rounds, apparently immune to the torrential rain. The housekeeper hesitated for a moment, something rare in her always efficient behavior. "Dinner will be served earlier today. Mrs. Blackwood will be receiving important visitors." Sarah nodded, realizing there was something more Margaret wanted to say. After days of observing the house's dynamics, she had begun to notice the small signs, looks exchanged between staff members, conversations that ceased abruptly upon her arrival, doors that were hastily locked. "Margaret," Sarah called when the housekeeper was already heading to the door, "you've worked for the Blackwoods for a long time, haven't you?" 28 years, miss," Margaret replied, her face a mask of neutrality. "Then you must have known my father, Michael Parker. He worked here in 1998. The sound of clinking porcelain betrayed the tremor in Margaret's hands. "I'm sorry, miss. I don't recall." But her eyes said otherwise. Before Sarah could insist, the housekeeper hastily retreated, leaving more questions than answers hanging in the air. Sarah sighed, turning her attention back to the book in her lap, an old edition of accounting records she had accidentally found while exploring the dustier shelves of the library. Its yellowed pages contained information about Blackwood Holdings from the late 90s, the time when her father had worked there. Most of the numbers didn't make sense to her, but a note in the margin caught her attention. In handwriting, she recognized, as her father's was written, "Check offshore transfers, Phoenix Project." A noise in the corridor made her quickly close the book. Through the half-open door, voices were approaching. "We can't risk it." It was Victoria Blackwood speaking. "The compatibility test needs to be done today." "But Mother, what if she finds out?" Andrew's voice sounded tense. "Aren't all the other exams enough?" "Don't argue with me, Andrew. You know very well why this is necessary." The voices faded away, leaving Sarah with a new mystery to decipher. Compatibility test. She had already done dozens of exams since she arrived. What would be the need for one more? Determined to investigate, Sarah waited a few minutes before leaving the library. The corridor was deserted, but she could hear voices coming from the main office. She approached silently, aware that she was breaking several house rules. "The DNA needs to be compatible." Victoria's voice came muffled through the oak door. "We can't risk—" The rest of the sentence was lost when a phone rang inside the office. Sarah quickly retreated, her heart pounding. DNA? Compatibility? What exactly were the Blackwoods looking for? Back in her room, Sarah tried to organize her thoughts. Since finding the photo of her father, small details had begun to connect. The suspicious looks from older staff members, Victoria's excessive restrictions, the constant exams. Her cell phone vibrated, a message from the hospital where her mother was interned. The news was good. The new treatment was showing promising results. Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. As much as she wanted to investigate the mysteries of Blackwood Mansion, she couldn't risk her mother's treatment. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Thompson. "Good afternoon, Sarah." He entered, carrying his usual medical bag. "We need to do one more small exam before proceeding with the fertilization protocol." Sarah watched as he prepared a syringe. "What kind of exam is this, doctor?" "Just a routine check," he replied without looking directly at her. to ensure everything is perfect for the procedure. As the doctor collected her blood, Sarah noticed something different on the tube's label. It didn't have her full name, just a code, Phoenix Project, Sample 23. The same name she had found in her father's notes. "Dr. Thompson," Sarah began, trying to keep her voice casual. "You knew my father, didn't you? He also worked for the Blackwoods." The doctor froze for a moment, almost dropping. The blood tube. "That was a long time ago, Sarah. Some stories are better left in the past." Before she could insist, he quickly packed up his equipment and left the room, taking with him the tube of blood and another piece of the puzzle Sarah was trying to put together. That night, during dinner, Sarah observed Victoria Blackwood with new eyes. The matriarch presided over the table with her usual iron elegance, making small talk with the guests, a couple of lawyers Sarah had never seen before. "So, dear," Victoria addressed her with false sweetness, "how are you adapting to our routine?" "Very well, Mrs. Blackwood," Sarah replied, maintaining her best smile. "Everyone has been very attentive." "Excellent." Victoria raised her wine glass. "After all, you'll be carrying the future of the Blackwoods. We need to ensure everything is perfect." The way she emphasized the word perfect made Sarah shudder internally. Under the table, her hands clenched into fists. Whatever the Blackwoods were hiding, it was related to her father, to the mysterious Phoenix Project, and somehow to the baby she was supposed to conceive. Later, in her room, Sarah carefully removed the old photo from its hiding place. She observed each face, each detail, looking for clues that could explain the connection between her father and the Blackwoods. It was then that she noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the corner of the photo, partially visible, was a folder with the same symbol she had seen on the blood tube today. A stylized phoenix. A noise in the corridor made her quickly hide the photo. Through the crack in the door, she saw Dr. Thompson and Victoria whispering. "Results confirmed," the doctor was saying. "The compatibility is 99.9%. "Excellent." Victoria's voice carried a satisfaction Sarah had never heard before. "We can proceed with the next phase." Sarah quietly closed the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Something told her that the next phase had nothing to do with a simple in vitro fertilization. The Blackwoods were looking for something specific in her DNA, something related to her father's disappearance and the mysterious Phoenix Project. Lying in her bed, Sarah knew she had reached a point of no return. She would continue to play the role of the perfect candidate, following all of Victoria's rules. But behind the scenes, she would investigate every clue, every whisper, every document she could find. What she didn't know was that each step towards the truth also brought her closer to a secret that the Blackwood family had been protecting for decades, a secret for which they were willing to do anything to keep buried. The day of the fertilization. Procedure arrived with a tense atmosphere in Blackwood Mansion. Sarah observed the unusual movement of doctors and nurses through the window of her room, while a nurse prepared her morning medication. The rain falling outside seemed to amplify the feeling of isolation that consumed her. "Take this, Miss Parker." The nurse handed her a glass with a clear liquid. "These are the vitamins prescribed by Dr. Thompson." Sarah hesitated for a moment, remembering the conversation she had overheard about compatibility tests. "What vitamins are these exactly?" "Just a standard protocol to prepare your body for the procedure." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Pretending to bring the glass to her lips, Sarah managed to spill part of the liquid onto a handkerchief discreetly. She would keep it for later analysis, if she could find a way to do it. The morning passed in a blur of preparations. Sarah was led to a wing of the mansion she had never visited before, transformed into a high-tech clinic. Sophisticated medical equipment occupied a series of interconnected rooms, and a complete medical team awaited her arrival. "Good morning, Sarah." Dr. Thompson greeted her with his usual professional smile. "Are you ready to begin?" Before she could answer, Victoria Blackwood entered the room, her presence immediately dominating the environment. "Doctor, can we talk in private before we start?" As the two moved away, Sarah noticed a folder on the nearby table, the same stylized phoenix mark stamped on the cover. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction of the team, she managed to take a quick look. The words Phase 3 Implementation jumped out at her, along with a series of genetic codes that made no sense to her. "Miss Parker," Victoria's voice made her quickly step back. "Let's begin." The procedure itself was surprisingly quick. Sarah stared at the white ceiling, feeling strangely disconnected from her own body as Dr. Thompson and his team worked. Victoria remained in the room the whole time, her eyes never leaving the monitors that displayed data Sarah couldn't understand. "Done," Dr. Thompson announced after what seemed like an eternity. "Now we wait for the implantation to be successful." "Excellent," Victoria smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah will be under observation for the next 48 hours. I want constant monitoring." As she was being taken back to her room, Sarah noticed something different in the corridor, a door ajar that normally remained locked. For a brief moment, she glimpsed the interior, walls covered with monitors, some displaying DNA sequences, others showing what appeared to be genetic comparisons. "This way, Miss Parker." Margaret appeared out of nowhere, quickly closing the door. "Mrs. Blackwood insists that you rest properly." Back in her room, Sarah tried to process everything she had seen. Something about today's procedure didn't fit with what she knew about common in vitro fertilization. The equipment, the monitors, the obsession with genetic compatibility. Everything pointed to something much bigger. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Andrew Blackwood. "How are you feeling?" he asked, maintaining a safe distance. "Fine, I think," Sarah replied, studying his face. "Mr. Blackwood, can I ask a question?" He nodded, tense. "Why is your mother so interested in genetic compatibility? That shouldn't be a concern in a normal fertilization procedure, should it?" For a moment, something passed across Andrew's face. Fear, guilt. "It's just a precaution, Miss Parker. We want to ensure the best possible outcome." "Like you ensured with my father?" The words came out before she could contain them. Andrew visibly paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." He quickly headed to the door but stopped before leaving. "Sarah, be careful with the questions you ask in this house. Not all answers are safe." That night, unable to sleep, Sarah decided to take a risk. Taking advantage of the security guard's shift change that always happened at midnight, she slipped out of her room. The corridor was dark and silent, illuminated only by the moonlight entering through the tall windows. Her feet led her to the library. With an improvised flashlight from her cell phone, she began to search in the older shelves. That's when she found it, a dusty file marked as Financial Records 1998. Inside, besides spreadsheets and reports, there was a photo that made her blood run cold. It was her father again, but this time next to a woman she immediately recognized, a younger version of Victoria Blackwood. They were in a laboratory, and in her father's hands was a folder with the Phoenix symbol. On the back of the photo, a note. "Phoenix Project, success in Phase 1, MP confirms sequence viability." "You shouldn't be here, Miss Parker." Sarah spun on her heels. Margaret was standing in the doorway of the library, her face a mask of concern. "Margaret, please," Sarah pleaded, showing the photo. "You know what happened to my father, don't you? What is the Phoenix Project?" The housekeeper looked nervously over her shoulder before closing the library door. "There are things in this house that it's better not to know, miss. Your father found that out the hard way." "What do you mean?" Margaret hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Your father didn't just work here. He discovered something about the true purpose of the Blackwoods' research. And then a noise in the corridor made her stop abruptly. Footsteps were approaching. "Go back to your room now," Margaret whispered urgently. "And Miss Parker, be careful with what you drink or eat in the next few days. Not everything is what it seems to be." Sarah barely had time to hide the photo in her pocket before the door opened, revealing Victoria Blackwood in her silk robe. "Well, well," the matriarch smiled coldly. "What an interesting meeting, having trouble sleeping, dear." "I just came to get a book," Sarah improvised. "In the dark? What dedication to reading?" Victoria approached, her eyes dangerously gleaming. "You know, Sarah, you remind me a lot of your father. He was also curiously persistent. The way she said those words made Sarah shudder. "Margaret, escort Miss Parker back to her room," Victoria ordered. "And Sarah, from tomorrow on you'll have constant company, for your own safety, of course." Back in her room, Sarah waited until she was sure she was alone before examining the photo again. Her father looked tense in the image despite the forced smile. What had he discovered? And how did this connect to the baby that might now be growing inside her? One thing was certain. The Phoenix Project wasn't just any research project. It was something the Blackwoods were willing to do anything to keep secret. And now Sarah was at the center of it all. Lying in her bed, she placed her hand over her belly, thinking about the procedure performed today. What exactly had they implanted in her? And more importantly, what was the true purpose of this elaborate scheme? Andrew's words echoed in her mind. Not all answers are safe. But it was too late to turn back now. Sarah was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. What she didn't know was that at that exact moment, in the secret laboratories of Blackwood Mansion, computers were processing her genetic sequence, comparing it to a specific code, a code that her father had helped create decades ago, and for which he had paid the highest price. 2 weeks after the procedure, Blackwood Mansion had transformed into an even stricter prison for Sarah. Her movements were constantly monitored by a companion, a nurse named Nancy, who followed her like a silent shadow. "Your vital signs are great today," Nancy commented while doing the morning checks. "Mrs. Blackwood will be pleased." Sarah just nodded, watching the nurse record the data on a tablet. In recent days, she had noticed a curious pattern. All data was sent directly to a server identified only as PX Labs. The pregnancy test would be conducted in a few days, but Sarah already felt that something was different in her body. Subtle nausea, increased sensitivity to odors, and mainly a strange energy that seemed to pulse under her skin. "Time for your morning walk," Nancy announced, putting away the equipment. The mansion's garden, once a refuge, was now just another place of constant surveillance. As they walked along the stone path, Sarah noticed movement near the hedge, another security guard joining those already present. "Miss Parker," Victoria's voice startled her. The Blackwood matriarch emerged from one of the side paths, impeccable in her blue silk ensemble. "How are you feeling?" "Well, Mrs. Blackwood, just a little tired." "Natural, considering your condition." Victoria smiled, that smile that never reached her eyes. "Dr. Thompson will come this afternoon for some more tests. Nothing to worry about." But there was something in Victoria's tone that made Sarah worry even more. In recent days, she had noticed an increase in nighttime activity at the mansion. Lights on in the laboratory until late, whispered meetings, equipment being discreetly transported. Back in her room, Sarah took advantage of a rare moment alone. Nancy had gone to fetch her medication, to examine again the photo she had found in the library. Something in the laboratory shown in the image caught her attention, a sequence of numbers written on a whiteboard in the background. Taking a paper, she wrote down the numbers: 47, 23, 89, PX, Alpha. The same code she had briefly seen in her medical records days ago. A knock on the door made her quickly hide the photo. It was Margaret bringing her lunch. "Mrs. Blackwood apologizes, but she won't be able to join you for lunch today," the housekeeper informed, placing the tray on the table. Then, in an almost imperceptible movement, she slid a small piece of paper under the napkin. Sarah waited for Margaret to leave before picking up the note. "Digital archive, password Michael 1998. Her heart raced. Michael, her father's name. Margaret was trying to tell her something. That afternoon during the exams with Dr. Thompson, Sarah carefully observed every detail. The doctor seemed more tense than usual, frequently consulting a file on his tablet. "Doctor," Sarah risked, "these exams, are they just to confirm the pregnancy?" Dr. Thompson hesitated. "We're monitoring various parameters, Sarah. It's a delicate process, like the Phoenix Project." The tablet slipped from the doctor's hands, falling with a dull thud. For a moment, panic crossed his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." He quickly replied, but his hands were shaking as he picked up the tablet. Sarah noticed that the screen was still on, briefly showing an email before the doctor closed it. She managed to catch only a few words. Genetic sequence activated. Preliminary results positive. That night, after Nancy finally retired, Sarah discreetly turned on the laptop she had found in her room, a gift from Andrew so she could distract herself. Her previous attempts to access anything beyond entertainment sites had been blocked, but now she had something new to try. After several minutes of searching, she found a hidden folder in the system. Margaret's password worked. What Sarah found made her blood run cold. They were files from the Phoenix Project, dated 1998, reports, spreadsheets, and most importantly, emails exchanged between her father and William Blackwood, the deceased patriarch of the family. William, the results of the last test are alarming. The genetic sequence we isolated has properties that go beyond our initial predictions. We cannot proceed without considering the ethical implications. Michael, your concerns are understandable, but irrelevant. The Phoenix Project is bigger than all of us. The sequence is the key to everything we've dreamed of. There's no room for hesitation now. WB. Urgent. William, I've found anomalies in the data. The sequence isn't just replicating, it's modifying itself. The test subjects are showing unexpected mutations. We need to stop immediately. MP. The last email was from Victoria Blackwood, dated the day of her father's disappearance. Subject containment status neutralized. All data secure. Project proceeds as planned. VB. Sarah felt nauseous, and it wasn't just the symptoms of possible pregnancy. The pieces were starting to fit together. Her father had discovered something terrible about the Blackwoods' research, something related to genetic modifications, and now, years later, she was carrying something that could be the result of those same studies. A noise in the corridor made her quickly close the laptop. Footsteps were approaching her room. Sarah ran to the bed, pretending to sleep, when the door opened silently. "She's sleeping," Victoria's voice whispered. "The results? Positive." It was Dr. Thompson. "The sequence is replicating exactly as predicted. She's perfect. The genetic combination we've been looking for decades. Excellent, keep monitoring. We can't risk losing this specimen like we lost the others." The door closed, but Sarah remained motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. Specimen. That's how they saw her. Not as a woman carrying a baby, but as an experiment. In the darkness of her room, Sarah placed her hand over her belly. What exactly was growing inside her? And more importantly, how could she escape from Blackwood Mansion before it was too late? A soft beep from the laptop caught her attention. On the screen, a new message had appeared in a chat window. "Sarah, I know you found the files. There's more, much more. Meet me tomorrow in the greenhouse at 3 p.m. Come alone." Andrew Blackwood was about to break his silence. But Sarah couldn't help wondering, was it a genuine offer of help or another trap in a game that was becoming increasingly dangerous? The distant sound of medical equipment in motion echoed through the corridors of the mansion, constantly reminding her that with each passing minute, whatever was growing inside her was becoming stronger. And with that, her time to uncover the truth and possibly escape was rapidly diminishing. The clock marked 2:55 p.m. when Sarah finally managed to shake off Nancy, convincing her that she needed to rest after her vitamin session. The path to the greenhouse had never seemed so long, each step echoing in her ears like a drum. The Blackwoods greenhouse was an impressive structure of glass and cast iron, filled with rare plants and exotic orchids. Sarah entered silently, the humid and fragrant air enveloping her like a cloak. "You came?" Andrew's voice emerged from behind a large fern. He looked different, tense, almost nervous, nothing like the controlled executive she had met. "I didn't have much choice, did I?" Sarah replied, keeping her distance. "What's going on here, Andrew? What did your father and my father discover?" Andrew ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look years younger. "It's complicated, Sarah, much more than you can imagine. Try to explain it to me. Start with what exactly I'm carrying." He looked nervously at the greenhouse windows before speaking. "The Phoenix Project began in the 90s, when my father discovered something extraordinary, a unique genetic sequence that could revolutionize regenerative medicine. The emails I found talked about mutations. Yes? Andrew approached one of the orchids, touching its petals delicately. The sequence had incredible properties. It could self-regenerate, adapt, evolve. My father saw the potential to create a new generation of human beings, stronger, more resistant, practically immune to diseases. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. And my father? Michael Parker was brilliant. He wasn't just an accountant. He was a molecular genetics genius disguised in the finance department. He helped develop the project, but then Andrew hesitated. Then he discovered something wrong. He discovered that the sequence was unstable, that it could cause unpredictable changes in human DNA. He wanted to stop everything, but my father was obsessed. And my mother. A noise from outside made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the greenhouse. "We don't have much time." Andrew spoke quickly, his voice almost a whisper. "Sarah, you're not just a surrogate. Your DNA, because of your father, is compatible with the Phoenix sequence. You are the key to completing what they started 25 years ago. The baby, it's not an ordinary baby. They modified the embryo with the perfected Phoenix sequence. They're using you as an incubator to create something that should never exist." The footsteps were closer now. Sarah could see shadows moving through the frosted glass of the greenhouse. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, her heart beating erratically. "Because—" Andrew swallowed hard. "Because I saw the results of the latest tests. The sequence isn't just developing in the embryo. It's starting to alter your DNA too. In a few weeks, the changes will be irreversible." Sarah instinctively placed her hand on her belly. Now she understood the constant exams, the intensive monitoring, the mysterious vitamins. "How can I stop this?" "There's a way, but it's risky. In the main laboratory, there's a server with all the Phoenix Project data. If we can access it and expose the illegal research, we can—" The greenhouse door burst open with a bang. Victoria Blackwood was standing in the entrance, flanked by 2 security guards. What a touching scene! Her voice was icy. "Mother and father sharing a special moment." "Mother," Andrew began, but Victoria cut him off with a gesture. "You've always been the weak one in the family, Andrew. Just like your father in the end, full of inconvenient moral doubts." "How could you?" Sarah stepped forward, anger overcoming fear. "How could you do this to me? To my father?" Victoria smiled, a smile that made Sarah freeze. "Your father was a foolish idealist who couldn't see the bigger picture, just like you, dear. But don't worry, soon you'll be part of something much bigger than yourself." With a nod, the security guards advanced. Sarah felt a sting in her arm, a syringe. Her vision began to blur. "No!" She tried to fight against the approaching darkness. What have you done?" The last thing she saw was Victoria's face, that cold smile still on her lips, and Andrew being restrained by the security guards. "Take her to the laboratory." Victoria's voice seemed to come from far away. "And as for you, my son, it's time to learn that some people need to be sacrificed for the greater good." When Sarah regained consciousness, she was in a different room. The walls were white and sterile, and she was connected to several monitors. Through an observation window, she could see sophisticated medical equipment and screens displaying DNA sequences. On one of them, she recognized the code she had seen so many times, 472389 PX-alpha. But now there was something new, a simulation showing how the sequence integrated into human DNA, transforming it into something completely different. The door opened, and Dr. Thompson entered, accompanied by a medical team. His normally gentle face was masked by a clinical and distant expression. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Sarah," he said, preparing a syringe, "but you're part of something revolutionary, the first of a new species." Sarah tried to move, but discovered she was strapped to the bed. Her body felt heavy, different. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The Phoenix sequence is integrating into your DNA faster than we predicted. Soon you and the baby will be the first specimens of an evolved humanity." He paused, observing the monitors. Your father would be proud of what he helped create." "My father tried to stop this," Sarah retorted, tears of anger in her eyes. "Your father couldn't see beyond his ethical limitations." Victoria entered the room, imposing in her white suit. "But you, Sarah, you're living proof that he was wrong. The sequence chose you. It's adapting perfectly to your organism." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think. Somewhere in that complex, Andrew was probably imprisoned too. He had tried to help her, had tried to expose the truth. And now... An alarm began to sound on one of the monitors. Dr. Thompson rushed to check the data. "Incredible," he murmured. "The cellular replication rate. I've never seen anything like this." Sarah could feel it. Something was changing inside her. It wasn't just the modified embryo. Her own body was transforming cell by cell, and somewhere in her mind, a new consciousness was beginning to awaken. The question now was no longer how to escape, but if there would still be anything of herself left to save when it was all over. The days in the laboratory blended into each other in a haze of constant exams and observations. Sarah had lost track of time, but her body remembered every moment, every change, every transformation. "The results are extraordinary," Dr. Thompson commented while analyzing another blood sample. Sarah could hear the excitement in his voice, even through the observation glass that separated her from the rest of the laboratory. "The integration of the Phoenix sequence with your DNA is occurring at a level never before seen." Sarah observed her reflection in the mirrored surface of the observation window. Superficially, she still looked the same, but there was something different in her eyes, a golden glow that wasn't there before. Her cells seemed to vibrate with a new, strange energy. "How are you feeling today?" Victoria entered the observation room, elegant as always in her pearl grey ensemble. "Like a lab rat," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than she expected. The drugs they used to keep her submissive seemed increasingly less effective. "Oh dear," Victoria smiled, that cold smile Sarah had learned to hate. "You're much more than that. You're the future of humanity developing before our eyes." One of the doctors approached with another syringe, but before he could reach her, Sarah felt something strange, a wave of energy coursing through her body. The syringe trembled and shattered in the doctor's hands. Victoria arched an eyebrow, impressed. "Fascinating. The sequence is manifesting faster than we predicted." Sarah flexed her fingers, feeling the strange power running through her veins. "What have you done to me? We've given you an extraordinary gift." Victoria approached the glass. "The Phoenix sequence isn't just a genetic modification. It's the next step in human evolution. Self-regeneration, increased strength, expanded mental capabilities, and this is just the beginning. And the baby? The baby will be even more extraordinary. A child born with the sequence fully integrated into its DNA from conception. The first of a new species." Sarah closed her eyes, focusing on the sensations in her body. She could feel the embryo growing inside her, but it was different from any normal pregnancy. There was a consciousness there, something developing much faster than it should. "Where's Andrew?" she asked, opening her eyes again. "My son is reflecting on his choices," Victoria replied vaguely. "He was always the weak link in the family, too sentimental like his father." "What happened to William Blackwood?" The truth. So a flash of something, sadness, anger, passed across Victoria's face. "William lost his vision in the end. He started questioning the project, just like your father. I had to make difficult decisions for the greater good. You eliminated him. I protected him from his own weakness," Victoria corrected. "Just as I've protected this family for decades, the Phoenix Project is bigger than any individual." An alarm sounded on one of the monitors. Dr. Thompson rushed to check the data. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called, excited. "The cellular energy levels, it's impressive." Sarah could feel it. Every cell in her body seemed to be awakening, pulsing with a force she could barely control. The laboratory lights began to flicker. "Contain her," Victoria ordered, but it was too late. The observation glass trembled and cracked. Medical equipment began to malfunction. Sarah stood up from the bed, tearing off the electrodes and tubes connected to her body. Victoria tried to maintain calm, but there was fear in her eyes now. You don't understand the power you're manifesting. You need guidance, control. No. Sarah took a step forward and the glass cracked even more. You don't understand. Whatever you've created, it's beyond your control now. At that moment, a figure appeared in the laboratory doorway, Margaret carrying a folder. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper called, her voice trembling. I found this in Mr. Williams' old office. Victoria turned, irritated by the interruption, but then paled when she saw what Margaret was holding. It was a folder with the phoenix symbol, but different from the others. This one had a red mark. This isn't possible, Victoria whispered. William destroyed those files. Not all of them. Margaret opened the folder, revealing documents and photos. He left copies with specific instructions. Sarah felt something change in the laboratory. Air. The doctors and security guards looked nervous, exchanging worried glances. What's in those files, Margaret? Sarah asked, her voice echoing strangely in the electrically charged environment. The truth about the Phoenix Project. Margaret replied, staring at Victoria. About the first tests, about what really happened to the previous subjects, about what William discovered before— Silence, Victoria ordered, but her voice betrayed panic. Sarah closed her eyes again, concentrating. She could feel something new now. Not just the power in her cells, but a connection with the baby, with the laboratory, with the files themselves. Images began to flow in her mind. Secret experiments, test subjects who developed powers similar to hers, but who lost control, who transformed into something no longer human. And at the center of it all, an even more disturbing truth. The DNA— Sarah opened her eyes, staring at Victoria. It's not just about evolution, is it? The Phoenix sequence. It came from somewhere. Something you found. Enough! Victoria moved towards the door, but Sarah raised her hand. The laboratory doors closed simultaneously. No. Sarah took another step forward, and the glass finally shattered. You're going to tell me everything. About my father, about William, about the true origin of the Phoenix Project. The equipment around began to levitate slightly, responding to the power emanating from her. The baby in her womb seemed to pulse with the same energy, amplifying her capabilities. You wanted to create something new, Sarah continued, each word charged with a force that made the walls vibrate. But you didn't realize you were playing with forces beyond your comprehension. And now? Sarah! A new voice cut through the air. Andrew was at the laboratory door, supported by Margaret. His face showed signs of aggression, but his eyes were determined. You need to control this. The power. It can consume you, like it consumed the others. Sarah felt tears in her eyes, tears that glowed with a strange golden light. How can I trust any of you? Because, Andrew limped towards her, I found your father's last file. He wasn't trying to stop the project just for ethical reasons. He discovered something about the origin of the sequence, something that would change everything. Victoria moved quickly, trying to reach a phone, but Sarah stopped her with a simple gesture. The Blackwood matriarch was gently but firmly pressed against the wall by an invisible force. It's time for the truth, Mother. Andrew spoke, his voice filled with determination. Sarah deserves to know everything. About her father, about what really happened that night 25 years ago, when it all began. Sarah could feel it. The moment of truth had arrived, but while the secrets of the Phoenix Project were about to be revealed, an even more urgent question loomed in her mind. After knowing everything, after understanding the true nature of what she was becoming, would there be any way back? The laboratory was in complete silence, except for the low hum of equipment and the energy that seemed to emanate from Sarah. Andrew limped to one of the workstations, inserting a flash drive into the main computer. In 1998, he began, his voice echoing in the tense environment. Blackwood Holdings wasn't just an investment company. We had a secret biomedical research division, personally commanded by my father. Images began to appear on the screens, old photographs of a scientific expedition in the Amazon. It was during an exploration in a remote area that they found something extraordinary. Andrew continued, showing a series of documents. An isolated tribe that exhibited unique capabilities, accelerated regeneration, immunity to diseases, exceptional longevity. "The Phoenix sequence," Sarah murmured, still keeping Victoria immobilized with her new powers. Yes and no. Andrew typed a few more commands revealing complex genetic analyses. Their DNA was different from anything ever seen, but it wasn't natural, Sarah. It was as if it had been modified a long time ago. Victoria laughed bitterly from her corner. "Tell her everything, Andrew. Tell her how your precious father reacted when he realized what he had really discovered." "William became obsessed," Andrew admitted, his voice laden with pain. "He believed. He had found evidence of an ancient advanced civilization, one that had genetically manipulated that tribe thousands of years ago." Sarah felt the baby moving in her womb, as if responding to the revelations. "And my father? Michael Parker was more than an accountant." Margaret approached, holding the red folder. "He was a brilliant geneticist who had stepped away from research after some questionable ethical incidents. William recruited him specifically for the project." "Show her," Victoria ordered, surprising everyone. "Show her the video of the first test." Andrew hesitated, then accessed an encrypted file. On the main screen, an old recording appeared. William Blackwood and Michael Parker were in a laboratory similar to this one years ago. "Test 472389PX Alpha," William's voice echoed from the past. "First attempt at integrating the Phoenix sequence into human cells." Sarah watched, horrified, as the recording showed the results. Cells transforming, mutating in impossible ways. "It was an initial success," Andrew explained. "But then, the video continued, showing the devastating side effects on the first volunteers. The mutations became unstable, uncontrollable. Your father tried to stop everything," Margaret said softly. "He discovered that the sequence wasn't just a genetic modification. It was something more, something he believed should never have been awakened." Michael was right. Andrew typed a few more commands, revealing handwritten notes from his father. "The sequence had a kind of consciousness of its own. It could adapt, evolve, choose its hosts. And it chose me," Sarah concluded, feeling the energy pulsing in her veins. "No," Victoria spoke, her voice surprisingly soft. "It chose your father first. That's why he was so valuable and so dangerous." Sarah felt her heart stop for a moment. "What?" "Michael Parker was the first human in thousands of years to show a natural compatibility with the sequence," Victoria explained. "He could have been the first, but he refused. He tried to destroy all the samples, all the research." "And then you eliminated him," Sarah accused, the energy around her intensifying. "No," Victoria surprised everyone again. "He escaped, with Richard's help." Andrew turned sharply to his mother. "What?" "Your father finally understood the danger," Victoria continued, unexpected tears in her eyes. "But I couldn't let the project die, not after everything we had sacrificed." "So William Blackwood didn't die of natural causes," Sarah concluded, the pieces fitting together. "My husband became weak," Victoria responded, her voice hardening again. "Like Michael, he wanted to destroy everything. He didn't realize we were on the brink of something revolutionary." "Where is my father?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Andrew opened another file, a series of tracking reports. "He's alive, Sarah. Hidden, protected by a secret network that my father helped create before I silenced him," Victoria completed coldly. "But now it doesn't matter anymore. What's growing inside you, Sarah, is the culmination of decades of work. The Phoenix sequence has finally found its perfect host." Sarah staggered, feeling a wave of dizziness. The laboratory lights flickered violently. "The baby," she gasped. "It's not just a modified baby, is it? It's the next step." Victoria smiled, even while still trapped by Sarah's force. "A human being born with the sequence fully integrated, child of a compatible host and—" She looked at Andrew. "No." Sarah turned to Andrew, horror in her eyes. "The DNA, it wasn't yours. It was mine," Andrew admitted, shame in his voice. My mother discovered that I also carry a latent version of the compatibility. She planned everything, including our meeting. Sarah felt her world spin. The energy emanating from her began to make equipment explode. Sarah, you need to control yourself. Margaret cautiously approached. The sequence responds to strong emotions. If you lose control now... But it was too late. Sarah could feel something awakening inside her, not just her own powers or the baby, but something older, deeper. Memories that weren't hers began to flow. Lost civilizations, ancient experiments, a power that should never have been awakened. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice carrying a strange echo. The sequence, it has its own purpose. It's using us, it always has been. The laboratory walls began to tremble. Alarms sounded throughout the complex. Sarah! Andrew tried to approach but was repelled by a wave of energy. Fight against this, you're still yourself. Am I? She asked, golden tears streaming down her face. What your father and mine discovered, why they really tried to stop everything. Victoria finally seemed to realize the true danger. The containment protocols, activate them now. But the security systems were useless against the power Sarah now manifested. Each attempt to contain her only fed more of the energy flowing through her. The sequence wasn't a tool for evolution, Sarah continued, her words carrying an ancient knowledge. It was a warning, a reminder of what happens when humans try to play gods. The entire laboratory was in chaos. Equipment exploded, documents flew, and at the center of it all Sarah hovered a few inches above the ground, her body emanating a golden light. There's still time, Andrew pleaded, trying to reach her again. We can fix this. Find your father. Reverse the process. Sarah looked at him with eyes that now shone like miniature suns. Some processes can't be reversed, Andrew. Some powers can't be controlled. And with those words, a wave of pure energy emanated from her, passing through the laboratory walls as if they were paper. The Phoenix Project had created something beyond their comprehension, and now everyone would have to face the consequences. Blackwood. Mansion had transformed into a battlefield. Waves of golden energy pulsed through the ancient corridors, shattering glass and making the very walls groan under pressure. At the center of the chaos, Sarah floated in what was once the main laboratory, her body enveloped by an aura of primordial power. Sarah, please! Andrew shouted through the energy storm. You're still in there, fight against this! But Sarah could barely hear him. Her mind was flooded with memories and knowledge from lost eras, civilizations that had discovered secrets that should have remained buried, powers that had cost their very existence. Fascinating. Victoria observed everything from her corner, still trapped by Sarah's invisible force, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and scientific admiration. The sequence, it's manifesting completely. Shut up, Mother. Andrew tried to approach Sarah again, using furniture and equipment as shields against the energy emanating from her. Don't you see what you've caused? Margaret, who had taken shelter behind an overturned table, firmly held the red folder. Miss Sarah, your father's notes. He found a way to control this. Sarah slowly rotated in the air, her golden eyes focusing on the housekeeper. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of other voices, ancient and powerful. Michael Parker discovered the truth. That's why he tried to stop it. That's why he tried to warn us. Us? Andrew asked, finally managing to get closer. The predecessors, Sarah replied as images flowed through her mind. The civilization that created the sequence, they weren't trying to evolve. They were trying to survive what they had become. More ancient memories flooded her consciousness. Cities of crystal and light, beings of unimaginable power, and then the collapse. The moment when the power became too great to be contained in physical forms. The sequence isn't a tool for evolution, Sarah continued, her voice trembling with the weight of knowledge. It's a prison, an attempt to contain something that should never have been freed. And now, Victoria asked, her voice softly dangerous even in her vulnerable position, will you let all our work be in vain? Will you deny the next step in human evolution? Evolution? Sarah laughed, a sound that made the remaining lights flicker. "You don't understand. The baby, it's not just a new form of life. It's a portal." Andrew paled. "A portal to what?" "To them." Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the power pulse even stronger. The predecessors didn't disappear. They transcended physical form, and now they want to come back. The entire building shook with this revelation. Medical equipment exploded in cascades, and a golden light began to emanate from the walls themselves, as if reality was shattering. "That's why we need you," Victoria shouted through the chaos. "Together we can control this power, use it to..." "Control?" Sarah turned to her, and the energy around her intensified. "You still haven't understood. No one controls this power. It controls us." At that moment, something changed. Sarah felt a contraction. Not a normal pregnancy contraction, but something deeper, as if reality itself was contorting inside her. "The baby," she gasped, slowly descending to the ground. It's beginning. Impossible." Dr. Thompson, who had remained silent until then, frantically consulted his data. "The gestation shouldn't be this advanced." "Time," Sarah whispered, more ancient memories flowing through her. "Time means nothing to them. They're accelerating the process." Andrew finally managed to reach her, holding her hands. The contact sent waves of energy through both of them, and for a moment he too could see. The lost cities, the beings of light, the power they had awakened without understanding. "We can still stop this," he said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "Your father. He discovered something in the original files, a way to reverse the process." Sarah stared at him, golden tears streaming down her face. "How do you know that?" "Because," Andrew hesitated, then continued, "because he contacted me 3 months ago. That's why I started questioning everything, why I tried to help you." Victoria writhed in her invisible prison. "Traitor! After everything I did to protect our family..." "Our family?" Andrew turned to her, fury in his voice. "You eliminated father because of this obsession. You manipulated all of us." Another contraction hit Sarah, stronger this time. The energy around her pulsed violently, and for a moment everyone could see a rift in reality itself through which forms of pure light tried to manifest. "There's no time," Sarah gasped, trying to maintain control. "They're coming, using the baby as a bridge." "Margaret," Andrew called, "Michael's files, there must be something." The housekeeper quickly opened the red folder, frantically flipping through documents. "Here, a formula, something about anchoring the sequence. Giving it an anchor." "Point?" Dr. Thompson suddenly understood. A way to keep it connected to physical reality, preventing complete transcendence. Sarah felt the baby moving inside her, not like a normal child, but like a force of nature trying to take form. The memories of the predecessors screamed in her mind, begging to be freed. "How?" she managed to ask through the pain. "How can we..." "Through me," Andrew answered, understanding dawning in his eyes. That's why genetic compatibility was so important. It wasn't just about creating something new. It was about creating something that could serve as an anchor. He held Sarah's hands more firmly, and power flowed between them like an electric current. For a moment, the golden energy seemed to stabilize. "No!" Victoria shouted. "You can't! Stop this. It's our chance to transcend, to become more than human." But Sarah could see now, through the ancient memories, through the power coursing through her veins. Transcendence wasn't evolution, it was dissolution. The predecessors hadn't evolved, they had lost themselves in their own power. "Andrew," she whispered, focusing on him through the energy storm. "We need to do this now. The baby, we can't let them use it as a portal." He nodded, understanding what needed to be done. Dr. Thompson quickly prepared a series of injections based on Michael Parker's formulas, while Margaret recited ancient words found in the archives, words that seemed to resonate with the very energy permeating the environment. The power of the predecessors roared through Sarah, trying to resist, trying to complete what had begun thousands of years ago. But something stronger was fighting it now. Not just science or ancient magic, but something profoundly human. Love, choice, the decision to remain anchored to her humanity, no matter the cost. Sarah looked at Andrew one last time, seeing in his eyes the same understanding, the same determination. Then together, they began the process that could save or destroy everything. The laboratory of Blackwood Mansion had transformed into a vortex of golden energy, where past and present merged in a crucial moment. Sarah and Andrew, united by physical contact and the power flowing between them, faced the greatest battle of their lives, not just for survival but for the very nature of humanity. "Now, Dr. Thompson," Andrew shouted through the chaos of energy. "The formula." The doctor, trembling but determined, approached with the syringe containing the compound based on Michael Parker's discoveries. The solution glowed with its own light, as if responding to the energy permeating the environment. "It's going to hurt," he warned, preparing for the injection. Sarah only nodded, unable to speak as she fought against the forces trying to dominate her. Inside her, the baby pulsed with ancient power, a portal about to open to something that should never return to this world. The moment the needle penetrated her arm, the entire universe seemed to stop. The formula entered her system like liquid fire, meeting the energy of the predecessors in a microscopic battle in every cell of her body. "No!" Victoria screamed from her corner, still trapped by the invisible force. "You're destroying our only chance at transcendence." But something was changing. The golden energy began to condense as if being pulled back to a central point. Sarah could feel it. The ancient memories, the primordial power, everything beginning to anchor itself to something more solid, more human. "It's working," Margaret whispered, still holding Michael's files. "The sequence is stabilizing." A scream tore through the air, not from Sarah, but from Victoria. Somehow she had freed herself from her invisible prison and was now advancing towards them, her eyes glowing with an insane light. "I won't let you destroy everything." She pulled something from her pocket, a syringe with a black, shimmering liquid. "If we can't transcend, then we'll all succumb." "Mother, no!" Andrew tried to move, but he couldn't let go of Sarah. The anchoring process depended on their continuous contact. Victoria injected the contents of the syringe into her own arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body began to glow with a dark, unnatural light. "You're not the only one who kept secrets, Sarah." She smiled, her voice changing to something deeper, more ancient. "Some of us never wanted to return, only to destroy." The energy in the laboratory changed, becoming denser, more dangerous. Sarah could feel through her new perceptions. Victoria had infected herself with a corrupted version of the Phoenix sequence, something the predecessors had created as a last defense against their own uncontrolled power. "Margaret!" Sarah called, her voice tense with effort. "In the red folder, there must be something about this." The housekeeper frantically flipped through the documents. "Here, Michael wrote about a negative variation of the sequence, a way to cancel out the predecessor's power, but the cost doesn't matter." Victoria laughed, her body beginning to transform, dark energy emanating from her in waves. "Everything will be consumed." Sarah felt the baby moving again, but this time it was different. It was no longer a force trying to escape, but something responding to the threat, something wanting to protect. "Andrew," she whispered, a new understanding dawning in her mind. "The baby. It wasn't meant to be a portal. It was meant to be a protector." He looked at her, comprehension rising in his eyes. "An anchor for humanity and a defense against those who want to destroy it," Sarah completed. Together they channeled their combined energy, no longer fighting against the power, but embracing it with a different purpose. The golden light intensified, but now it was softer, more natural. Victoria advanced, her hands now claws of dark energy. "You can't stop the inevitable. Humanity is doomed to repeat our mistakes." "No." A new voice cut through the air. Everyone turned to see Michael Parker standing in the laboratory entrance, older, but still recognizable from the old photo. "Humanity learns from its mistakes, Victoria. That's what makes us different from them." "Dad?" Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Michael stepped forward, carrying a folder identical to the red one. I spent years studying what we discovered here. The predecessors weren't destroyed by their power. They were destroyed by their inability to accept limits. Victoria laughed, a sound that made the walls tremble. Limits are for the weak. Limits are what make us human, Michael responded calmly. Then to Sarah, the formula you received, it wasn't to destroy the power, but to harmonize it with your humanity. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The power inside her was changing, finding a balance that the predecessors had never managed to achieve. The baby, she smiled, feeling the new life inside her calming, stabilizing. Will be both human and extraordinary, Michael completed. Like you, daughter, Victoria screamed in rage, advancing for a final attack. But Sarah was ready. With Andrew by her side and her father nearby, she channeled all the power, not to destroy but to heal. The wave of golden energy that emanated from them was no longer chaotic or destructive. It was pure life, pure love, everything that made humans different from the predecessors. It hit Victoria like a gentle but irresistible tide. For a moment, the Blackwood matriarch fought, her dark energy trying to resist. But then something in her eyes changed, as if, for the first time in decades, she truly saw. "William?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face as the darkness left her body. You were right. The dark energy dissipated, leaving only an old, tired woman, finally free from her obsession. The laboratory fell silent, except for the soft hum of residual energy. Sarah felt the power inside her stabilize completely, no longer an alien force trying to escape, but a natural part of who she now was. "Is it over?" Andrew asked softly. "No," Sarah smiled, placing her hand on her belly, where the baby now rested, peacefully. "It's just beginning." 6 months later, the garden of Blackwood Mansion had been transformed. Wildflowers had replaced the artificially perfect flower beds, and the old hedge had given way to a small natural grove. Sarah sat on a bench under a blossoming tree, cradling a baby that glowed softly in the sunlight. Beside her, Andrew smiled, his face free of the tensions that had marked it for so long. Michael Parker, now residing in a nearby house, approached, with Margaret, both carrying more old Phoenix Project papers. "We found more records of the predecessors," Michael announced. "Stories that need to be preserved and warnings that need to be remembered." Sarah nodded, observing her son. A special child, yes, but still profoundly human. He'll grow up, knowing everything, the responsibility that comes with power, and the love that keeps us human, Andrew completed, gently kissing her forehead. In her room upstairs, Victoria Blackwood also observed the scene. The time in the rehabilitation clinic had given her a new perspective. The power she had so desperately desired had been there all along, not in transcendence or domination, but in the human capacity to love, learn, and grow. The baby laughed, a sound that made flowers spontaneously bloom around the bench. But no one was startled or tried to control the phenomenon. It was just another expression of the new balance they had found between the extraordinary and the human, between power and wisdom. Sarah smiled, feeling the power gently pulsing in her veins, now a natural part of who she was. The predecessors had tried to transcend their humanity and lost themselves. But she and her son represented something new, a future where the extraordinary didn't have to come at the cost of the human. The sun set over Blackwood Mansion, its last golden lights reminding everyone that sometimes, from the greatest trials, comes the most beautiful rebirth. Dear listeners, Sarah's journey shows us that true power lies not in transcending our humanity, but in embracing it with all its complexities and beauties. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the mysteries of the human heart. Leave your like, share your impressions in the comments, and tell us which city you're following us from. We've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find the link in the description. Until next time.